and learning. One of them is motivation. So a big issue in cognitive psychology is motivation to learn. So, why should kids care about history? How do we get them to? How do we get them motivated to acquire all this knowledge? That's one thing. Another thing, actually, also is the impact of culture and context. Cognitive science, as we've been discussing it so far, is just treated as something universal. People are embedded in cultures. We need to understand that if we're going to teach effectively. And also, as well, I think teaching for understanding to ensure integration of knowledge and things that give the things that cohesion and meaning. I'd like to see more of that.
Thank you, Arthur. I know I did say at 9 o'clock. So if any of you have to go early, please. That's fine. That is fine. I just want to take 10 more minutes because there's some things I wanted to ask in terms of the review. So sorry.
I'm sorry.
Oh no. Oh no, that's fine, Josh. Thank you so much because you've shared so much nuggets, I should say. So thank you.
No, it's fine. We could definitely do it again. Just planning a wedding on Thursday. So.
All the best with the wedding.
Thanks, Josh. Congratulations.
Yeah, congratulations.
Thank you, Chris. We're brilliant listening to both yourself, Arthur and Chris. Learn a lot, and hopefully you have another opportunity to do this again and learn further.
Thank you, Josh. I definitely want to do a part 2 of this because it is such a mighty document that it needs further exploration. So thank you, Josh, so much, and good luck with the wedding.
No problem. Bye.
No problem. Bye. I wanted to talk about. So I've got about 2 more questions, which is one on systems at subject and school level, and then number 2, what really stood out to you guys in terms of curriculum of the review. And I know, Arthur, you've got some WWs and EBIs which I'm really intrigued about, so I really want you to share that. So my next question is systems at subject and school level. So it says, rightly so, that adequate curriculum time is given to history to enable teachers to deliver a broad history curriculum that develops secure knowledge for pupils. It also echoes that, senior leaders should assure themselves of the quality and the breadth of the history curriculum. They need to understand how pupils progress in history, which allows them to support and challenge decisions at a subject level. And leaders are aware of the downsides of whole school policies and their impact on the ability of teachers and departments to deliver a high quality history education. And teachers and curriculum designers have secure and wide ranging knowledge of the past of the academic history and how to teach history pupils. As we know, in most schools, your line manager as a history HOD could be a maths teacher or could be an art teacher or something really different. So how can schools what advice would you give to schools or HODs to kind of protect the uniqueness of history against whole school practices, because that can really be a detriment to a quality history curriculum being given out? I'll start off with you, Arthur, and then Chris.
Well, to be honest, I can't claim to know an awful lot about systems other than just thinking back to my time as a head of faculty and head of history. And also as a history teacher, actually. I think the thing I would say is that teachers are intelligent people, right? We think on our feet. That's what we do for a living.
Yeah.
Managing teachers is difficult. You have to give them respect, resource, and opportunity to flourish. And I can remember having heads of department who would sit there with clipboards asking me where I've got. And I didn't want to work for those guys. Whereas people who said, what ideas have you got? Come and help us solve this problem. So I think it's really important that school leaders don't get too hands-on, because I think what you do is cramp the style of your teachers. Obviously, you need to support them. That means resource, it means time, it means respect, actually, in the sense of recognizing their autonomy and not telling them how to do things. But I wouldn't claim to know much about this other than from the sharp end in my experience. I've not researched systems or anything. But I think autonomy, respect, space to get things done, these are vital.
Thank you, Arthur. And Chris?
Yeah, I think it's the big question that sits underneath a lot of this is around, in a sense, it's very well for us as history enthusiasts to respond to this. But of course, actually, what's going to really matter is how senior leaders respond to the various subject reviews that are going on, which I'm sure are all saying much the same thing about prioritising subject distinctiveness across the different subject domains that have been had this report, sort of style of report done so far. And I think, you know, the curriculum leaders, and I would say that because I am one, so, you know, I accept my own bias here, but, you know, I do think it puts a central role on curriculum leaders. And, you know, I think we've seen a drifter in the last 25 years or so to having lots of senior leaders with very kind of generic sort of roles, teaching and learning, you know, which, you know, curriculum, assessment, data, behaviour, etc. And those things are obviously important in the running of the school, but that idea of actually understanding different subjects and their distinctiveness, I think, has been lost or has been assumed to be kind of an easier part. Oh, well, the curriculum leader can just sort that out. You know, that's up to them to deal with it, without being given the commensurate amount of investment in training, in access to the subject networks. You know, I mean, there's quite a number of us in history, aren't there, that are very online and active through the HA and active through the edgy Twitter and all that stuff. And I've learned loads from doing that. You know, it's transformed my understanding of what's going on. But loads of heads of history aren't in that world. They're not encouraged to participate in that world. They're not subscribed to the Historical Association. They're not reading teaching history. You know, and so there's really a sort of and that's going to be prioritised by school leaders who've got to really be in the know and be encouraging that type of work and encouraging people to be kind of really proud of their subject. Now, obviously, this is in a secondary context. I don't want to speak to primary because I don't know very much about that at all.
Yeah,
It's a whole different. That's a whole different animal entirely. But so I think that we need to really emphasise that role of curriculum leader. They need to be, you know, I think the training in how to do subject leadership can still be a lot stronger. I think the HA does a lot of good work, but again, that's got to come across all subjects. And you know, we need to be looking at Ofsted can be a lever there for enhancing that. But that can also be a perverse incentive in some ways as well, which, you know, often lots of schools are frightened of Ofsted, aren't they, and kind of do things because Ofsted tell them to. You know, and I think with a lot of this, you know, ultimately a lot of senior leaders are going to be out there saying, well, yeah, this is all very well and good, but ultimately it's going to come back to the exam results. And if the exam results aren't good, it doesn't matter how good our history curriculum is, because you know, and sometimes the link isn't there, is it? Sometimes having a brilliant history curriculum does not necessarily lead to an amazing Progress 8 score, does it? So,
that's so true.
And until schools are getting outstanding with mediocre Progress 8 scores, and schools are getting requires improvement with amazing Progress 8 scores, you know, while that link is still there, that correlation is still there, then obviously, and one does not always follow from the other, particularly if you're working in like a highly disadvantaged context or some other kind of challenging environment. Maybe your school's financially really up against it, or staffing's been a problem, whatever. You know, that's going to be a difficulty, I think. So, you know, I think that's the interesting area now is for senior leaders to look at these. And I think as a head of history, let's talk about these with our line managers. Let's go into our line management meetings.
Oh, that's really good point.
You know, email it to your line manager, say, oh, just to make you aware, this has come up. This is really interesting.
That's a really good point.
And maybe that way it gets that upward filter. You know, oh, are you aware that there's another 6 of these for these other subjects as well? You know, and I think trying to really, you know, if you're in a school where maybe that's not going, that awareness maybe isn't there, or this isn't the kind of thing to discuss. You know, if you say something, oh, Ofsted have done this, you know, that's probably likely to get people's attention, isn't it? So, you know, I think that's maybe the sort of direction. But yeah, I think it's a big challenge. A big challenge of the review is how that clashes with existing school systems.
Well, thank you so much, Chris. Arthur, I know you've said that you've made a list of worries you've had in recent years, and WW's INVERT report addressing those, and EBIs where you think the report needs improvement. I am so intrigued that I know other listeners would be intrigued in terms of what are those WWs and EBIs from the report. If you're willing to share, please.
Well, I mean, okay, the first thing I would say is as I said earlier on, I think tremendous respect to Ofsted for doing this. It's not an easy task. And that's great. It's really good to have knowledge taken seriously by the inspectorate. You know, not that long ago, back in the 2000s, it wasn't often. And it's also really interesting that they're focusing on curriculum design, you know, rather than just things you could show in 20 minutes in a lesson. So this is all excellent. I think, by the way, it also makes a really useful point, which is teaching history is the most cited thing in the report. And what that draws attention to is the importance of teacher networks and teachers working autonomously and together to develop their subjects. But it also draws attention to the importance of higher education, actually, in teacher education. You know, teaching history is often the articles emerge from PGCs and MAs and things like that. And the editors are and have been for a very long time, but not all of them, of course, working in higher education institutions. So that's an important point about what you shouldn't destroy if you're going to try and maintain curriculum knowledge, and what you have to nurture, which is partnerships between institutions and different kinds of expertise. And also, I think it's really important and valuable that the report stresses the importance of the disciplinary and not just the substantive. And actually, I think it takes our conversations forward in a number of ways by talking about disciplinary schema as well as substantive schema. I find that really interesting.
Yeah.
Things I don't like so much. I mean, if I'm entitled to do that, having said
Yeah. Yes, please.
I wouldn't be really respectful of them having done it. But I'd like to see a number of things. And this, I mentioned this, the point of motivation, of asking, you know, why history matters. I don't see that in the report at all, really. You know,
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a good point.
You get kids to care.
Wow.
Kids, and I've got 3 kids. One of them loves history. One of them thinks it's all right. The other one, you know, wouldn't touch it with a barge pole. So how do we get kids to care is a really important question. I've puzzled with that as a parent as well as with a teacher.
Yeah.
You know, kids who look at me as if they were bored sometimes and so on. So how do we make history valuable for kids? That doesn't discuss that very much. It's all about knowledge building, but I mean, you know, in and of itself, that isn't very motivating for kids, it seems to me. Another thing I think it's overly academic, if I can say that, as an academic myself.
Yeah.
I think, right, in history, we do want to understand how historians talk about the past, but there are lots of other people talking about the past as well, and we want to understand that in our you know, our kids to understand that, don't we? I would talk about the public understanding of the past. So, you know, why has there been all this controversy about statues?
Oh, that's a really good point. Yeah.
So enabling our kids to engage with debates and arguments about the representation of the past across the piece, not just the academic, is something I'd like to see more discussion of, and there's no hint of that really in the report. Also, as well, I think there's a lot of research going on outside England which doesn't figure very much. And I think, if I'm honest, and it's a bit of a shame to say this given that I work in London, but I think the most interesting history education research going on in the world at the moment is happening in
Canada. Oh, okay. I thought I was going to say Canada, because I know they've got quite good history over there. Yeah.
So the States, I mean, so for example, if I can name check some people, Abby Riesman is a brilliant researcher working in the States. But yeah, I mean, Carla van Boxtel, Janet van Drie in Amsterdam, and much of their work you can find online. I just think it's really driving progress in our thinking. And what that work is it is history-specific cognitive science.
Wow.
It's not this general stuff. So I'd like to see more of that. But having said all those things, you know, I don't want to diminish the achievement that the report represents.
Please do share, you know, you've mentioned some names that I've just completely forgotten now, but their work in terms of history-specific cognitive science, because that would be really interesting.
Okay.
Yeah, please do.
In the chat? Or?
Oh, you in the chat or on Twitter? I think most people listening follow you on Twitter. If you don't follow Arthur on Twitter, it's Arthur. It's at Arthur Chapman, right?
It's Arthur J. Chapman, I think.
Oh, yeah, at Arthur J. Chapman.
I would say that links to this stuff should be in the book Knowing History in Schools, which is free to download from UCL Press.
Yeah.
So introduction to that book has references to this work. So if people are interested, just have a look in chapter 1 at the references, or just DM me and I can help. Thank
you so much. And if you want to follow Chris as well, his at on Twitter, I think most people do, is at K_Shanks. Is that right, Chris?
It's at history KSS.
Oh, sorry. Okay, so I don't know where I got. Is that?
It's because my name is K Shanks History.
Oh, okay.
My handle is at history KSS. Can I just say as well, like as I was just nodding as Arthur was speaking there to what he was saying, you know, I really absolutely agree with what he's saying in terms of his sort of EBIs, and I agree as well. It is a very good report. But I think, that question of motivation is absolutely one I'm really wrestling with at the moment, and how to drive that in history. And again, I mean, as I say, I found Peps McRae's book very interesting on that. And he's done a couple of podcast interviews. Obviously, that's very general to education in general, and is not history specific, but trying to think about what some of the ideas in that book and the levers that he's talking about in terms of trying to generate intrinsic motivation, how that could work in history, is something I'm kind of wrestling with at the moment. But I'd really recommend everybody to have a look at that, because I thought that was excellent. And yeah, absolutely as well, what you were saying about looking at public, what do people think about history in the public domain, and history as a live historical topic is so relevant at the moment. And I mean, there's been some brilliant work on that, like the American West. I saw yesterday Alex Ford talking about on Twitter. He referenced bodies of children that had died in residential schools that have been shifted up. They've been moved out of the reservations into white residential schools, being repatriated back into the reservations to be properly buried. And what a brilliant, obviously tragic story, but what a brilliant example to show to children about the relevancy of history right now, that history is a present political issue rather than some dead white guys. Maybe that is one potential way in as well. But I thought Arthur's points were excellent.
Thank you so much, Chris, and thank you so much, Arthur. I know it went way above your time, but I really enjoyed this conversation. My last question, is how would you get disengaged teachers, because not everybody's into research, so disengaged teachers within your department engage with this research? Any tips for HODs? I'll pose this question to Chris.
Yeah, I think as obviously you have to, the biggest currency in schools is time. You shove a report like that to people, and people are going to, I ain't got the time to read that, particularly now. So I think as a curriculum leader, what you've got to do is try and distill it, haven't you? And as some people have already done, I know Alex Ford again has done some work on this and shared that very generously. But that to me is you've got to kind of distill those key bits and try and use your department meeting as a vehicle for discussing those issues and for trying to implement some ideas as appropriate. But yeah, clearly just shoving a big old report to time poor teachers that have lives to lead and families to look after is probably not the best idea, is it? And rightly so. So yeah, I think just try and synthesize as much of it as you can, and try and pick out the little nuggets that you want to share, and obviously make it available if people do get interested in more broadly what's being said. But yeah, I think the department meeting's got to be the vehicle for that. And what a better way to what a good thing to discuss rather than many of the things we often end up discussing in department meetings. So
that's a good point. Thank you so much, Chris. And Arthur, do you have any final remarks in terms of that?
There's something that occurred to me when Chris was talking earlier about motivation for kids, but it also applies for teachers. I think it's John Dewey, but I couldn't swear to it. My colleague Robin Whitburn, who does superb work on Black history and various other related issues, is the phrase "felt difficulty." We need kids to feel the difficulty, to want to know. And it's the same with teachers. Why should someone care about the latest? Media? I mean, why should they? Frankly, good question. But I mean, if you say, all right, then, so we're all struggling with this problem, and there will be plenty of problems that colleagues will agree we're all struggling with. Pick one of them and try and show them that there's something here that's going to help. That's how you can, get them motivated. It seems to me. Just if I could give you an analogy, which might be useful. Years ago, my department were misroomed. We were given an IT room, and all of us hated IT. All of a sudden, we had to figure out how to do it, because we were teaching one lesson a week for each class in an IT room. So all of a sudden, there was a community of inquiry in my department, and we were sharing the ideas we came up with. So we have to have a situation and a way of thinking about these issues that says this matters to me. There's a felt difficulty I want to address. So find the difficulties, find the bits of the report that might talk to things you know your teachers care about, chunk it down into something small, share it with them, and let's see what happens. That's the approach I would take.
I love that. Thank you so much. I don't want to take so much of your time, but I think we definitely need a part 2 because there's so much more in the research review that we didn't have time to go deep into. But thank you so much all for being interviewed, and looking forward to interacting more. For the listeners, please do follow Chris on Twitter and also Arthur on Twitter. So Chris, if you can just repeat your handle again, please.
Yeah, it's at History KSS.
And Arthur, if you could repeat your handle again.
At Arthur J. Chapman.
Thank you so much, both, and have a lovely evening and enjoy the rest of your week. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers.
Bye.
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 You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.